On today's show, Mike Shildt receives an extension and continuing, finally, the player review series, this time talking about our boy, Fernando Tatis Jr., the good, the bad, the ugly, which there wasn't much of, a lot of good. We still got to break it down for what was a magical 2024 season for our boy El Nino.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Friday, November 8th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno, or at LO_Padres, and potentially more social media networks to come. I don't know. I just feel like maybe I should start using Instagram more or TikTok more. We'll see. So keep it locked in here, and I'll let you know. But also, go check out my work at Baseball, justbaseball.com. Fantastic website where I write about the Padres and other general baseball stuff and help out with their new newsletter that will keep you up to date all off season, and my other podcast, Baseball versus the World, which is currently on a little hiatus, but it will be back soon. Today's episode, guys, is brought to you by me. That's right, folks. Me. No, I'm kidding. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Yeah. So here we go. We actually look. This is what's really going to be really fun over the next few weeks and the coming months is that you do get some updates, and I imagine that it's going to be quiet on the podcasting end in terms of some viewers and listeners. I'm not stupid. I understand the season's over, so it's not as much. So it's going to be very contingent on when we get news and whatnot. And we did get news. And it's kind of cool. Mike Shildt announced. Well, I mean, he didn't announce, but the Padres announced that they agreed to terms with an extension with Mr. Mike Shildt. Reading from Dennis Lin at The Athletic. The fifth full-time manager to work under President of Baseball Operations, AJ Preller, with a 2-year extension on Wednesday. Shildt, whose previous contract was set to expire after the 2025 season, now has a deal through 2027. In 2024, he and Preller provided reason to think their partnership could have rare staying power in San Diego. And I think that that's a big takeaway from this, is that Preller's had a lot of managers, and this is one of the reasons why I was critical of him and why I felt, yes, if you had to make a decision, that I would have departed from the AJ Preller regime, because I just don't think that it was, it tends to be, and I think I've used this analogy before, which is oftentimes I see fans they love making fun of, say, the Cleveland Browns, where they're how they have just drafted and haven't had a good quarterback in 30 years. And then they have those shirts that show all the names of them. And my reaction to that is always it's one thing to miss on a couple quarterbacks and not do well. It's another thing if the past 30 years you've had 52 starting quarterbacks and none of them have been good. That, to me, it doesn't add up, because then it becomes how it's for anyone who's seen the Spider-Man movie Into the Spider-Verse, when Miles intentionally misses every answer and the teacher's if you just answered blindly, you would at least get half of these or whatever. That's kind of how I feel about that. And in the case of AJ Preller, just to tie this back in, I felt as if, guys, it's the fifth manager. Usually what's the common denominator? It's AJ Preller. So I just didn't want to necessarily say and go doom mode and say it's just, he just missed on Tingler. Or Tingler was bad. It's Tingler's fault. Black is bad. Andy Green's bad. And Bob Melvin, clearly. Old man Melvin, he's bad. I will admit that the latter of those bunch, Bob Melvin, and a little bit of Jace Tingler, especially when he didn't defend Tatis enough during the 3-0 situation, did not do much to earn, I think, respect from the fan base. In a lot of ways, Melvin was very beloved the first season when they're actually good. And then it kind of started crashing down when he did make mistakes in the postseason with the usage of Josh Hader against the Phillies infamously. And then you have the season after that when they just had the most disappointing season ever, right? So I'm not saying that the managers that have been with the Padres, that there hasn't been some fault for them. I'm just explaining why I had thought he was the issue. And I like that the article on The Athletic kind of talks about that him and Preller have a really good relationship. And that's always possible too, right? I brought up that Browns example, but that was over the course of 30 years, right? And this is since basically 2016, 2015 under the Preller regime. So a slightly smaller sample size, I'd say. But I think that Shildt, if there's one thing that I would say that I liked about him, he just seemed to always have his guys' back. And it seemed like he always had urgency. I don't want to say that like every decision was great. I know you can nitpick the bullpen. I know you can nitpick, say, the decision to start Dylan Cease in Game 5 of the series or Game 4 of the series. So that's totally fine. Totally cool with that if people have that opinion. But for me, I think overall he was pretty solid. And one of the reasons that I was a little bit nervous, and I talked about in this podcast, was, and I was dead wrong. The Cardinals, I was like, well, why would they get rid of him? Maybe they know something. And, Mike Shildt claims that it was just a philosophical, ideological kind of difference between the two, between management and himself. But the Cardinals are clearly not a good organization right now, right? This happens sometimes. Even gold standard organizations in sports will go through a period where you're like, wow, remember when they're like, we're going to have probably a stretch over the next 10 years with the New England Patriots just make awful decisions. We're going to have a stretch, and we're already having a stretch, where the Cardinals are now making bad decisions. The Cardinals just hired Chaim Bloom of the Boston Red Sox, who was responsible for the Trevor Story contract, where they overpaid basically a defensive shortstop who can every now and then hit for power. Not a bad player, but they signed like an 8-year deal or whatever it was, worth a lot of money, and also traded Mookie Betts, and the return was awful, right? And the Cardinals brought him in. Now, I don't think Chaim Bloom is the worst GM we've ever seen. I frankly think that he's just someone that follow the money. This is a guy that they like to bring around. He was with the Rays, he was with the Red Sox, and the Red Sox decided to cut down on spending. And what do we know is probably going to happen with the Cardinals? They're going to cut down big on spending too, in my opinion. I just think that they're headed for a really, really prolonged, kind of period of failure and not caring about investing in your team and ball club. I think that is what's going to happen, because the last time that Bloom was bought in, what did he do? He immediately trades probably one of the 5 best players in the history of their franchise. You know what I mean? And Mookie Betts. So that's what I'm looking at. So maybe them getting rid of Shildt was just them being dumb. And thankfully, it worked out for us, right? It was a really strong year. I don't think that it was more of a formality, as the article mentions. Like, I don't think that there was any question that he'd be brought back. It's just a nice little update. Really excited about that. And again, my biggest impression was that I liked that he had some fight. I liked that he stood up for his guys. Especially early on in the season, and it just seemed to work. And if there's a good harmonious relationship between the two, then I'm all for it. And I think everybody else should be too. And, this is how we go. And maybe I'm even wondering if like Shildt was part of the reason that the Padres kind of boycotted the Fox broadcast famously over in Game 3 of that series, right? In the Dodgers series. And that's funny. I did get like a couple comments from you guys. One person was saying, what is it? At Subaru was saying, I like the way you create your own narrative to these comments, questions. Damn well that the critique wasn't about Tatis Profar. Were not the way they celebrate. The comments were in regards to their actions toward the opposing fans, the tongue wag, the chest bump, and kiss blowing. I just find that to be like, you're ignoring the other side of that, which is like, you're acting like it's unprompted, right? And I think that what you're seeing is players can do this stuff all the time. And the kiss blowing from Tatis, that was literally in response to fans throwing stuff at him. And I don't think Profar going like this and hopping backwards after making a great catch means that this is why you lose. No, the reason why you lose is because the team just didn't show up, right? When it counted the most, especially with the offense. But I just think that's frankly kind of preposterous. And I think that, this idea that fans, it's like only the players start it. It's like, no, like fans are jeering at them all the time and saying stuff all the time. Not necessarily like hateful, awful, like bigoted things or anything like that. I'm not implying that, but they get stuff all the time, right? Like, hey, you go watch. I don't know if someone had some footage of like when Garrett Cole was starting at Fenway Park for the Yankees in the wild card game, and they have that annoying visitors bullpen where like you're just like 3 inches away from the nearest fan, and they're all like, Cole, you stink, and all this stuff. So I don't mind if like players make a good play and they're going, mwah, you know what I mean? Like, whatever, like, forget you, right? I don't find that to be like some sort of flaw, right? I think that that's just you responding, and you got to show up. Don't get me wrong, but I think that in general, this has been a critique, especially with Tatis, for a long time, who we're going to be talking about today, guys. We're going to be talking about all the good and the bad from his season and giving my letter grade for his season, and just kind of how I felt about him. And I think that what's really fun is the first player review we did for this offseason was Xander Bogaerts. I honestly think Bogaerts is the only player where I'm going to have like a lot of bad. And I did. So go everybody check out the Xander Bogaerts player review. I know it was from a while ago, but just in case, you want to hear my thoughts on that. I think that basically every player we're going to talk about over these next few weeks, I really think was basically as good as you could have hoped. But we're going to do some critiques. We're going to talk about it. Right. after this, guys. But first, I need to take a second to talk to you about one of our sponsors, and that is the lovely folks over at Hims. Folks, guys, sometimes intimate moments happen spontaneously, and we always want to be ready so we can perform in the bedroom. Hims, HIMS, provides access to treatments that can help you stay hard and last longer, giving you that boost of confidence so you can be ready whenever the mood strikes. Your sex life is important. Your schedule is busy, though. You don't want to necessarily go to a doctor's office to get treated for ED. I mean, you do want to go to an office, but you don't always have the time necessarily. But through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. It is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable, hard mints, and Viagra anti-alias and their generics for up to 95% cheaper, and helps you out, 100% online, so you don't necessarily need to worry about those uncomfortable doctor visits. So don't worry about that, guys. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's Hims, HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. Hims.com/lockedon, everybody. The products mentioned are chewable compound products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions do apply. Remember that, folks. Restrictions do apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Remember, everybody, that is hims.com, HIMS/locked on. And just like that, everybody, we are thriving and vibing into the player review for one, Sir Fernando Tatis Jr. Yeah. Shake that head. Let's go. Everybody tune in on YouTube if you want to see my lovely bobblehead and my new buddy Conquer the Squirrel, who's just kind of vibing over here. He's in a good mood. You know what I mean? On his little throne. And that's because of the Shildt news and whatnot. So shouts to him. And let's talk about Tatis. And we're going to start with all the good. And in my opinion, it was a lot, right? And I think that there's a lot in basically every aspect of being a ball player. I think that what you saw this year is not just statistical improvements for Fernando Tatis Jr. and not just like some excitement to seeing him be fully back, but you also saw some just good overall vibes with him. You can't really measure vibes. It's not empirical, but I think that with Tatis, there was really, I don't think there was a lot of questions about him this year, right? Like, I don't think there was a lot of questions about him. And I know that some people may be tuning in and saying, like, I love Tatis, and I thought, he had a good season, but also like, I don't know, was he really that great, or was he kind of disappointing? And that's a fair thing to say, right? Because if you look at the raw, just kind of counting stats, he had 21 home runs this year across 102 games. He had a 276 batting average, 340 on base, 492 slugging percentage, 135 WRC plus, and he was good for 3.2 wins above replacement according to Fangraphs. That's not necessarily like, wow, what a beast, what an MVP season. It is important to mention that he had 438 at-bats, 102 games, right? So he did miss time, so this is a major part of it. But to me, it's really important to note that with those less games, he still produced 3.2 wins above replacement as compared to last year where he had 4.1. And last year, his WRC plus was 112, right? So one of the things that we saw last year, and I think that it was very luck-based for why Tatis didn't necessarily do great, not to mention the injury, not to mention the suspension, coming back, after such a long time, basically, it feels like out of the sport. But the 150 WRC plus days we still haven't necessarily seen from Tatis. And there were times throughout this season where it looked like it was about to happen, but unfortunately he did get hurt. So that was a big product of this. But let us begin with some of the specifics, guys. Man, he still might have gotten unlucky. And I think that might be a genuine, like, good sign for him, right? This is a guy who you saw all the regular things. You guys know I love hard hit rate. I think it is the best advanced stat that you can go to. His hard hit rate was good last year, and that's one of the reasons that everybody was optimistic. His barrel rate was a little bit low, but this year, barrel rate up. He was in the 92nd percentile for that. Everything that matters in terms of just the raw data on being a good batter was exceptional. 96th percentile in expected weight on base. Expected batting average, he was in 97th. Expected slug, he was in 96. Average exit velocity, he was in 97th percentile. Compared to last year, he was he was the 89th percentile. So again, it's not that his numbers were bad last year. It's just that we saw an increase of the trend of Tatis being and working his way back to being that type of player who can be an MVP candidate when all is said and all is right. And hard hit rate, he was in the 99th percentile, 55.8% hard hit rate. That is up from last year, which was 49.3%. It's not as high as his career high, which was 62.2, but that was during the 2020 season. So you kind of got to take that with a grain of salt that those numbers might have been a little bit inflated. But his hard hit rate spiking up again this year, combined with the fact, you guys know I like looking at WOBA and expected WOBA. This year, 359 weighted on base. That's excellent. Let me be very, very clear. That's excellent. And his expected was 393. Right? So that tells you not only did he make strides into being a more powerful hitter, someone who was, hitting home runs when they counted, getting on base when it was needed, but he also might have gotten a little bit unlucky for the second year in a row, right? Last year can be explained by all the things I mentioned with the injury and, the suspension and all that. But this year, I think that you saw a lot of really good stuff. His isolated power numbers were really great at 216. Like that's a nice improvement. And I think that what you saw this year from Tatis was a player who got a little bit of his swagger back. And that's another point I want to bring up. And this is something that's not as, as empirical as stats, but he just had it this year. You can go back to, early on in the season, some of the home runs that he was hitting. You can look at the Cubs comeback, right? When they were down 8 and he hits the home run that puts them ahead. The way he looked at it, he had an aura about him. Last year, it wasn't that he was bad. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if just part of the reason Tatis felt a little bit more tempered and calm was because it was like not his place to, given the fact that you had the suspension, you had the absence of time that this team really desperately needed. And I do genuinely believe, I really do. I think it means something that Tatis got suspended after they had just traded for Soto. I really do. So I think that Tatis was, and again, now I'm just fully projecting here. I think that it is really, what's it called? I think it is really telling that Tatis was just a lot more calm. It's almost like he needs to earn the respect back, and it feels like he did earn it back this year. And I do think that matters, right? I'm not necessarily, someone who, I don't want to go full in this direction because it's also true that baseball is very stat-based and it's not necessarily like chemistry is as important as it is, I think, in other sports, right? But with Tatis this year, I love seeing that he had his swagger back, and I just love combine that with the fact that it still seems like he might have underperformed based more on luck, and we've got a great thing. Among players with at least 400 plate appearances, his expected weighted on base was the 10th best among all players in Major League Baseball. All players. That's really good. Right, so love that very much. And speaking of swagger, my third point, unforgettable postseason, and that absolutely counts, right? I understand that the Padres lost, and I understand he faded out a little bit towards the end, but that's just kind of what happens. But man, our guy Tatis continues to show up when it matters most, and I'm not just talking about your regular season moments, but with the postseason, he was just absolutely tremendous in totality this year. I mean, 1167 OPS against Atlanta, 950 OPS, or I'm sorry, 1,917. I was looking at slugging. He slugged 950 against the Dodgers, and he slugged 1167 against the Braves. In total, he has one of the best OPSs among all players in the history of the postseason. Granted, though, I want everybody to just remember, he's only been in 4 series of the postseason, so that's a little bit why, but it still means a lot that for such a young player, especially for a player who needs to earn back, I mean, I don't want to put it that way, but especially for a player who, went through it for a little bit, I guess I should say, for him to just show up against the Dodgers, against the Braves, always being there, always be dynamic to the point where he started to become that postseason player where nobody wanted to pitch to. Excellent stuff, right? So the postseason batting adds on to his swagger being back. But in terms of other things, in the regular season, he was also super clutch. Regular season WRC plus, he had a 261 in high leverage situations in terms of his WRC plus. That is excellent, right? And it's not always guaranteed that you're going to get stuff like that. So, I understand that everybody was good in high leverage situations this year. I understand that Profar was out of control, but Tatis has basically always been good, including in the 2023 season, when they were a little bit, disastrous, I guess you could say, in high leverage situations. Even last year, you saw that he showed up in those situations. And I think that is just a nice little addition that while last year, again, most of the team wasn't very good, right? And Tatis 80 WRC plus in high leverage situations. He was not as good. It's just nice to see him bounce back in that area and just be the leading force. This guy who's always going to show up for the big plays, right? Absolutely love to see that. Another thing are a little bit of his stats. Just in terms of his ability to see the ball, I think was a big, tremendous improvement. Lowered his K rate. And just in terms of the overall strikeout rate, 22.2 to 21.9%. That's not like a crazy seismic shift. And lowering your strikeout rate doesn't always equate to being a better player, because if you hit for a lot of power, right, then that's great. But strike out a lot, it's okay. You offset it with the power. You look at Aaron Judge, right? Like, he strikes out a lot, but it doesn't matter because he walks and he hits for a ton of power. Tatis, though, what I like is the power numbers were still there, even if not quite at prime, his 2021 season and then 2019, 2020, but they were really up there. They were some of the best in the league. I just mentioned the weighted on base percentage. I just mentioned the hard hit rate, and the strikeout rate stayed on this trend of going down. In 2020, 23.7%, 2021, 28% strikeout rate. Last year, 22.2%, and this year down to 21.9%. So I like that we got the power back on top of the strikeout rate going down. That is a really good sign. And that's not all. Guys, we're going to keep diving into some of the numbers and then get into some of the bad. And I think that the bad with Tatis, it was actually like, it's always a good sign when you have to kind of hunt for the bad a little bit. Tatis is not my number one player for the Padres this year that I'm going to be grading in terms of just who I thought had the most exciting and fantastic season. I think we all know who the actual one is going to be for that. But still, I want to talk about some of the bad, because I think some of the bad is still worth bringing up and things to monitor going forward. But before we do that, guys, I need to take a second to talk to you about another one of our sponsors, and that is the always plentiful folks over at PrizePicks. I don't know if plentiful, it sounds cool, plentiful PrizePicks, but let me tell you, when it comes to all the offers and all the nice bonuses they give you, they are plentiful, so maybe it does work. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. Folks, love to see it. Love to see it. It's the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Over 10 million users, like I said, and if you want to play alongside Drewski, you can do that with the PrizePicks community, and they give you some offers all the time, including, let me tell you guys, sign up today, you get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. And they also offer weekly promotions that can lead up to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. You think Justin Jefferson can get over 83.5 yards? I don't know. You think Jamar Chase is going to score like 4 touchdowns tonight? I don't know. Or yesterday night? You think whatever? You guys get what I'm saying? All that sort of stuff, they've got you covered on PrizePicks. And let me tell you, if you download the app and just use that code LOCKEDONMLB, you get that discount. You get that lovely offer of $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Remember, download the app PrizePicks and use code LOCKEDONMLB for that promo. PrizePicks, everybody. Run your game. And just like that, everybody, we're back in the final segment of this podcast, talking a little bit more about Fernando Tatis Jr. Let's talk about the last of the good and then get into the bad. Don't worry, we're almost done with this episode, which means it's a sign. It's a sign that there's not too much to talk about there. But even still, some other thing I want to talk about with Tatis, I mentioned that he lowered his strikeout rate. He also had the lowest whiff rate of his career against fastballs, excluding 2020, which I think... Is it okay if, like, from here on out, we kind of, like, I don't have to explain why I'm going to exclude maybe numbers from 2020 when discussing any sort of player performance? I don't know. Let me know about that. But anyway, lowest whiff rate against fastballs of his career. Very nice. Very nice. This has always been a player who's been able to kill fastballs. I'm not saying that this is like some incredible thing. But again, I think that also adds into why the numbers and the expected weight on base is kind of suggesting that he was still a little bit short of expectations in terms of his overall numbers. But still very good season. Another thing worth bringing up, he didn't swing as much at first pitches this year, but you didn't see an increase in first pitch strike percentage, which I think is great. I think that shows that he's the right amount of aggressive, and he's not falling too behind in accounts. And frankly, it tells me that pitchers are really scared of him. And even at the start of games and whatnot, depending on where they have him in the order, I think it's always interesting when Tatis is, a leadoff guy, especially to start off the game where you tend to see more fastballs as a player. It's kind of a game flow thing, and love that, right? And I like that he's not swinging as much at first pitches because he's not necessarily seeing them as much, or like literally like they're not being delivered to him as much, and he's not striking out as much. So all of that coalesces into just being a much more disciplined player than I think we were a little bit used to. He also improves upon off-speed pitches from last year. That was one thing that gave him trouble. Perhaps that was due to the time off, but one thing he wasn't as good with in 2023 was off-speed pitches. Specifically, off-speed pitches last year, he hit 220. And then this year he hit 261 with an expected batting average of 290, right? So a lot of this suggests that he was just really, really awesome basically every way this year. So shouts to Tatis, again, just to go through them one more time. Insanely clutch, regular season WRC plus, high leverage, 261. Of course, unforgettable postseason, one of the great postseason players we currently have in the sport, which is great. Still might have gotten a little bit unlucky when you look at the WOBA difference, and he had the 10th best expected weighted on base in all of baseball among players with at least 400 plate appearances. Hard hit rate from last season was good, but he jumped all the way back to what he was back in his prime, had his swagger back, lowered the strikeout rate, hit better against fastballs, hit better against off-speed pitches. All of that coalesces into a very good season for Fernando Tatis Jr. However, there are some bads, and I think that the most obvious one is the defense. And I don't really have an explanation for this. I don't think there's anything about Tatis from his, overall athletic profile, his strength with his arm. I don't think there's anything necessarily that changed in terms of the overall skill set. He's also, frankly, just too young for it to be changing at a dramatic pace, right? He's still just 25 years old. But overall, the hardcore numbers did show that he took a little bit of a step back when it came to his defense this year. And one of the reasons that I think a lot of people were predicting that he could win the MVP is because despite being basically just an average batter, we talked about that earlier in the episode, only like a 115 WRC plus, that he still delivered a 4-win season because his defense was that good. He was literally a platinum glove player. Last year, 27 defensive runs saved and 9 outs above average. It was tops in the league. There's a reason why he won the platinum glove. He was the first player outside Arenado to get that, right? But this year, 0 defensive runs saved and -1 outs above average. And there's a couple things for this. Another negative is that his sprint speed was actually down this year, 77th percentile. Compared to every previous year, he was always in at least the 90th percentile or higher. It's possible that I think that there's a world, and I don't immediately have an explanation for this, and I wonder if you guys actually have an explanation for this. One thing that I think would be interesting to look at is it's possible maybe that he pulled back just a little bit in order to keep healthy. And while he did get hurt this year, which I guess would be point number 3 for why it wasn't as awesome of a season, but it was a fluke getting hit by a pitch kind of situation. So that's not something that you can always bank on, but maybe that's part of it. But I'm just wondering, like, Tatis did make some mistakes, especially early on in the year, that were a little bit weird. He did not have as many highlight opportunities as he did last year. I am wondering if part of the defensive runs saved kind of metric was the fact that a lot of people were testing Tatis's arm in the outfield for very justified reasons. He hadn't really played it all that much of his career. I still remember when Tatis being moved to the outfield was like a trendy meme, like joke that people were bringing up. They're like, wow, this is crazy that they're just going to put him there, but they did, and it's worked out. But overall, I do think that you just saw him not get to balls as fast, not have as many opportunities to throw runners out, and in general, just not make as many plays, even though he's very capable of it. I don't think that this is something that I'm freaking out over, right? But I would like to see some more improvement there because 0, and at least he wasn't like an abject negative, right? If you look at some other players, right? Like, I mean, Luis Campusano being one of the best examples, like that guy was actively killing them every single game because of the defensive liabilities. I don't think that Tatis was actively killing them, but it did contribute to heavily why the Padres fell off in a lot of ways from their defensive numbers. Combine that with the Hassan Kim injury, combine that with a couple other things, Jurickson Profar not being a very good defender either. And that's why this team really struggled defensively despite the big names. And in some cases, despite the fact that you have like 3 Gold Glove caliber players, right? Jackson Merrill was very good this year. We're going to talk about him on another episode. But you still had, Ha-Seong Kim there. You had Manny Machado there, and then you have Tatis there. So it was a little bit surprising that the Padres overall didn't really produce as much defensively this year. And is that necessarily a bad thing? It's my one thing that I'm wondering is, like, does defense matter in baseball? I think it does, but, like, there are years where I'm like, guys, the Phillies have been good, like, every year, and I swear they just have not had good defenders. Like, they rely on Castellanos and Schwarber in their lineups every day, right? And I understand that they've addressed it, but, like, they've gone really far in the postseason. And this year, the year where the Padres defense was one of the weakest of the past few years, they won the most games they ever have under Preller. So I just, you know what I'm saying? So I'm like, I'm just toying with it. But nonetheless, I'm going to just assume that it matters. Tatis did take steps backwards this year. And again, I am wondering if part of that was just him easing up on the speed a little bit. Very hard to see. Next thing, another decrease in his walk rate. This is kind of the last thing. I think that with Tatis, all the good that I mentioned, I believe offsets this. I believe, right? I think that his walk rate of 11.4% and just hitting bomb after bomb in 2021, I think there's a world where Tatis, I just don't think that the skills aren't there. I do think that it is a little bit worrisome, right? That this isn't going to necessarily be a player that always gets on base at a tremendous clip. He makes up for it with the power, but I will say that he did not whiff at more pitches and he did not chase more pitches. It's okay if you're not walking at an amazing rate as long as you're hitting for power the way that Tatis is. So it's just a slight thing. I think the bigger issue would be the fact that it dipped again. Right, this isn't the first year that it's dipped. In fact, if you look at last year, it was at 8.4%. That was down 3% from the previous year, and he had a 10.5% in 2020. And then in 2019, his first year, he had a higher walk rate than he did this year at 7.3%. So it's one of those things to just keep an eye on. Again, the fact that he cut down on his strikeout rate, the fact that he hit for power, I understand that it offsets it, but it's just a little bit of a thing to keep an eye on, especially as he gets older and perhaps some of the power and all the athleticism starts to wane as you get older. It is important to have some good plate discipline skills and whatnot, and I still think he does. Right? He's not amazing. He's not like doesn't have the best whiff rate in the sport. It's not like he's amazing when it comes to not chasing pitches, but it's not detrimentally bad the way that it was last year. I think that last year, seeing the decline in the walk rate with the fact that he was chasing, I think that tells you that he was really pressing, and that last year's team was really a case of just a lot of players just like swinging for the fences and just unable to get anything going, and it's just not working out for them. But Tatis, I think that the only truly negative thing that I could say was the fact that, wasn't as good defensively, and they really could have used that this year at times. I'm not saying in terms of the postseason, but the defensive lapse, the defensive decline is a little bit unfortunate. I think that he can get it back. I do. I think he could go out and ball out. I still think that this is a player that at his best, if everything goes right, I think could be a 7 to 8 win player, possibly even more. I really do believe that. But the overall skills were so much closer to the 2021 Tatis than they were to the 2023 Tatis. And I think that that's what needs to be emphasized the most out of all of this, right? So, Tatis didn't have, unfortunately, the greatest season in the world. I'm giving him a B+ because, just a matter of fact, he missed a lot of games, guys. In fact, I think that that's the biggest thing. 102 games. He missed, what is that, 60 games. That's just what, that's just the reality of the situation, which is that he did not play as much. And that's not something that's an indictment on him. That's just a reality of what transpired this season. And there's a gray area that I'm trying to, kind of hit that I think you guys understand. So you combine that with the fact that his defense did decline a bit. You combine that with the fact that he didn't improve upon his walk rate as much. That's why it's a B+ for me, because he did miss time. And I can't, if a player goes off like Byron Buxton for 50 games and he's the best player in baseball, that's not an A+ season, right? Unfortunately, he did get hurt. But I do have confidence that Tatis, that was mostly just a freak accident. And I think that next year, he's still a player that you can pencil in as being one of the game's best, and potentially a player that you can always hope just is a team carrying player. Not just an all-star, like a team-carrying player. And even if it doesn't happen next year, that does not preclude it from happening the year after. This is just sometimes what happens, right? Look at Ronald Acuna. He's a good example. Ronald Acuna Jr. was a very good player that always had the potential, and we were always predicting this guy could win MVP, and then everything came together last year, right? And then he did win MVP. So I don't think that that's impossible for Tatis. I think it's possible he steals like 35 bags next year. I think he could get even more aggressive. I think that he's got his swagger back on a great level. So love you very much, Fernando. And that about does it for today's breakdown of Fernando Tatis Jr.'s season and today's episode of Locked On Padres, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast where you get your podcasts from. Follow the show on Twitter at @L_Padres. Follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. And until next time, guys, we're going to be hopefully doing a crossover with my guy Miller Thomas next week. Going to be fully back on the regular schedule. I'm sorry about that. Some work stuff popped up, and I've mentioned many times I was dreadfully sick over these past few weeks, and frankly over the past 2 months. I don't know what's going on, but we're okay now. So we're going to be doing that. We're going to be doing more player reviews. I think we're just going to do a pitcher next. Right? Forget Jackson Merrill. Who cares, right? But I'm hopeful that I think we're going to get even more news. I think it's possible we get a Ruben Niebla extension. But whatever it is, feel free to leave some comments for the Monday Mailbag Show. Plenty to get into for sure. Believe me, we're going to get some news. This is not going to be a super boring offseason. I don't think it's ever boring around this time. We're at least going to have stuff to talk about. So everybody, keep it locked in here on Locked On Padres. Until next time, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful, my Friar Faithful homies. Take care.